More governments want to keep you trapped. They want to take your money, they want to take your freedom, and they're cutting off the exits. Today, I'm going to talk about countries that trap you in their tax system. I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, where over the years we've helped everyone from multiple billionaires and celebrities to close to 1,000 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors who want to legally go where you're treated best. You can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. And I want to talk today about how countries trap you in their tax system. Now, you might be thinking, you've been watching us for the last decade, that I'm going to be talking about the United States. You'd be right. But I'm going to try and talk about more than that, both the future trends and the general principle of how tax works and how countries use their tax systems against you so that you can make the proper decisions based on where you want to live, where you want to be a taxpayer, and where you want to be a citizen. So, as we've talked about in numerous episodes before, there are numerous different tax systems that countries employ. Obviously, the most flexible, the most interesting for most people is totally tax-free. Look at the UAE, you look at the Cayman Islands, countries like that, you go there, no income tax. That's pretty flexible. But you've got numerous other tax systems, both that encourage foreigners to come. You've got numerous multi-year tax exemptions. You've got lump sum programs, non-dom programs, all kinds of different programs that can reduce your tax to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4%. You've got territorial tax countries that with proper planning can reduce your tax to 0 if you structure your assets and your business in different places than where you live. Those are pretty flexible tax systems. You've got a residential tax system, which is what most Westerners have, which you can leave the tax system if you accomplish and you check the box on certain things that they want you to do. Americans, on the other hand, have citizenship-based taxation. You are stuck in your country's tax net to where even if you move to Dubai, you're still going to pay tax. Now, you can greatly reduce that if you're an entrepreneur, in particular, through proper companies and exclusions and exemptions. It's not just limited to $100,000 a year. There are ways to properly structure your business to reduce that tax. If you're in capital gains, if you're passive income, you might want to look at Puerto Rico. That could be a place to go to reduce that. But no matter where you go, all the regulations, all the restrictions, all the reporting requirements of telling them where your foreign bank accounts are, reporting income on foreign source stuff, that's all going to come into play until you give up your U.S. citizenship. And so that's a citizenship-based system that not only taxes you, but regulates and requires reporting no matter where you live, all because you have your passport. You can see why in this year's Nomad Passport Index, the U.S. passport ranked number 41, because you've got 40 other countries in Europe and elsewhere that all have pretty similar visa-free travel privileges, but that don't have those restrictions, that maybe have a better reputation around the world. Number 41 out of about 200 isn't terrible, but it shows that the U.S. passport just isn't as valuable because it comes with that, it's like an albatross around your neck if you want to live overseas. And so what I've suggested is you're going to see more countries come out and implement similar policies in the future. You see Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh in Canada now basically extended their power through the next several years by getting together. One of the things that we've seen from the left wing, the fringe left wing in Canada, is, hey, why should you be a citizen of our country and not pay the piper? And so I think you're going to see a movement from Canada, from other Western countries. I've been hearing it from Germans. I've been hearing it from people in the Netherlands. I'm not so sure about the Netherlands, but Germany I can see, Canada I can see, possibly Australia I can see. There's a movement, particularly in English-speaking Western countries, where they're looking at what the U.S. is doing. They are seeing runaway inflation. They're seeing continued deficits, bigger than ever in some cases. They've spent more money in the last 2 years by a factor of 10 in some cases than they did to win World War II. And they're saying, what are we going to do about this? They can't go to the people who are being inflated to death, whose incomes are stagnant because of bad government policies that have been uncompetitive to entrepreneurs like me who have said, okay, I'll go and hire in Serbia. I don't need to hire 53 people here. And so, as a result, they can't squeeze any more blood from stone with the average taxpayer. 62% of Americans in 2020 paid 0 federal income tax, so they're going to go after everyone else. They'll do wealth tax, they'll do unrealized capital gains tax, they'll try and push that stuff through. But one thing they could simply do that probably in most countries would have broad political support is simply taxing people who live overseas. Because even though you have, depending on who you believe, anywhere from 6 or 7 to 12 million American expats in other countries, number one, that's a pretty small percentage of the country. Number two, most Americans don't really understand the idea of living overseas. They've never really thought about it. It seems very foreign to them, unlike in the UK where there's an expat section in the newspaper and British citizens are invited to high tea at the embassy in some countries. the U.S. embassy overseas doesn't really help people. But that's really not an issue of the U.S. I mean, it is a U.S. government issue, but it's also a reflection in my mind of just the culture. The culture of the United States, it's rather geographically isolated. Australia fits this bill. Canada fits this bill. Why would they, what's the political issue of saying, hey, Canada, 500,000 Canadians who live overseas, you have to pay. Could it be full boat rates? Could it be exceptions? Could there be reductions? Could there be, you got to pay half the rate? Who knows? But I don't see why, those 500,000 people are going to stand up and really be a fighting force. Hey, maybe some of them are for it. Maybe some of them don't care because they live in another high-tax country and it's just going to be a matter of treaties and working things out. But how many Canadians are nomad capitalists going where they're treated best who want to live in Dubai and reduce their tax rate to zero? They may have to pay eventually because they have the privilege of carrying a Canadian passport. And that's why I've told people, including Germans, if dual citizenship gets opened up, look at citizenship by investment programs, look at other ways to claim dual citizenship to where you're prepared if that happens, because when it becomes introduced, you may only have a month or 2 or 3 to respond. They're probably not going to give you 5 years to prepare. They're going to say, hey, here's what we're rolling through. It's going to go through slowly like all legislation does, and then boom, it's going to hit you over the head. And hey, a month from now, we're introducing this. And so I think that you're going to see not a lot more, but a few more countries introduce citizenship-based taxation. I don't think most mainland Europe countries want to do that. I've said there's some potential that the EU could try and push this through at a block-wide level. Certainly that could happen with a few countries kind of twisting and manipulating the way that countries have, for example, pushed Andorra into introducing a tax rate years ago. So you could see something like that happen as the big players get together and bully the other players. But generally speaking, I don't think outside of the West there's a big impetus to do this. You simply have too many people who are moving from those countries. You go to Serbia, you go to the Philippines, you go to Colombia. You've got a lot of people who are used to moving. Even in Ireland, for example, you've got a culture of immigration where I don't know that you can push that through as readily. But in countries where someone who leaves the country is deemed as a traitor, forget about renouncing your citizenship. When I left the United States as a U.S. citizen to live overseas, the idea that I would date another country's women, the idea that I would have a business overseas and I would spend my time somewhere else was blasphemy to people, even in my circle in some cases, and I had to get a new circle in some cases. But imagine look at the comments section. There are people who think simply leaving and not wanting to pay full boat tax because you don't agree with the country's policies is traitorous. And so do you think the politicians can't use that to bring that in? That's the first issue. Now, let's talk about the second issue. Because you've got other countries that don't want you to escape the tax net. Everything from relatively minor examples of if you're a French citizen for several decades now, you can't move to Monaco and avail of Monaco's very friendly 0% income tax policy. Right? Now, Monaco was never the best place to set up your business, but if you're just an individual, you can go and live there. You got a great tax situation. French citizens can't do that. They said, hey, this is too easy. Let's have a deal. Only the French don't qualify. You've got other countries that won't let you get out. And this doesn't just apply to your citizenship, by the way. This is if you're a taxpayer. Mexico and a number of Northern European countries, potentially a couple of other EU countries, they'll say, hey, listen, for the first 3 years, for the first 5 years when you leave, you've got to go to a country on this list. I've got a friend right now from Scandinavia who left, and he is elsewhere in the European Union because he's not allowed to move to Dubai. He's not allowed to move to the Cayman Islands. He may do that in the future. But right now, he's paying a moderate rate of taxation because he needs to do that to satisfy his home country tax authority that for the next 3 years, he is not going to be somewhere that's a tax haven. Other countries like Mexico, they say, hey, listen, we need to have certain treaties and mutual agreements with the country that you're going to, or else we're going to keep you in the tax net for a couple of years. And so that may not be an issue if you're a Mexican citizen. That may be you're someone who's lived in Mexico. You've gotten yourself into the tax net. Plenty of nomads and expats have found themselves down in Mexico these days. And I think there's certainly a gray area in the tax net in Mexico. But if you found yourself in the Mexican tax net, you may have a hard time getting out of that net unless you follow a certain set of protocol once you leave. Let's take South Africa, for example. They have what's called financial immigration. This is a unique South African process where you need to go through if you want to exit the South African tax system. That's going to have certain repercussions on you. And that could certainly be evolved into a wider citizenship-based taxation plan. Whereas right now, they're requiring you to go through certain steps. They're going to check up on you. That could be evolved over time. Other examples include Colombia, whose citizens have sometimes moved to Panama. It's a more tax-friendly place if you're living there full-time. And so Colombian citizens who made that move, Colombia has said, hey, we don't like that. so you can continue to pay us even if your income tax in Panama is much lower or even zero in some cases. Now, if you weren't a tax resident citizen of Colombia, I think you'd be in better shape. So people who are investing their way to work towards Colombian citizenship but never fell into the tax net wouldn't likely have to worry about this, but that's another consideration. You've seen in Hong Kong, as China comes in, hey, you're a Chinese citizen, so you should be paying on a certain basis on a worldwide basis. And then what you've also got is obviously countries where they won't let you leave. Now, historically we've talked about the nomad tax trap, where people simply think, oh, as long as I don't live in my country 183 days, I won't be taxed. Well, countries have made it more difficult to get out of the tax net and kind of trap you in by saying, oh, do you have one of these 5 tests that you meet? Okay, you don't meet the days test, you don't spend enough days, but what about all these other things? And I've told you situations over the years where I had a guy buy an apartment, for example, in a European country. He was living there 4 months a year, and our tax advisor in that country told him, no, house plus 4 months a year, bad vibes. Now, with proper tax planning, that would have worked, but with his particular very nomadic lifestyle, it put him at risk. And so every country is different. There's so many different situations, but Western countries in particular are finding more ways to suck you into the tax net, or more likely to trap you in when you're trying to leave. And so when you have so many ties to your country, whether it's actual, you own things there, or whether it's just emotional ties, right? I have so many people who come to me and they say, I'm tired of this Canada, I gotta get out. I have 3 homes in Canada, I'm willing to sell none of them. Well, that's gonna make it harder for you to get out of the Canadian tax system than someone who just says, you know what, I don't need an apartment, I don't need a home, I don't need the cottage, I'm gonna make a clean break. I'm not saying that's the be-all and end-all. I'm saying that is a step, because you're building a case that I don't want to live in Canada anymore. They're making the case that you do want to live in Canada and try and trap you back into the tax system. You're going to have to make some decisions. Obviously, physically, you've had in the last couple of years some people who simply can't leave their countries. Now, some countries, like the U.S. did have certain relief that if you came back to the U.S. and got stuck due to the pandemic, there were some exemptions, although I can't say that they were particularly generous. I mean, they were not so great in most cases. But if you have been physically stuck in your country, you've basically been told, hey, you've got to keep paying us tax. You don't have a choice. That is certainly opening up right now. But could that happen again? Could some other situation like that happen again? They've already used for years where they've gone after people who have left the country and said, oh, yeah, but you still have a storage unit here with some surfboards. Sounds like you wanted to come back after all. Pay us up. Pay us. You never left. Now they can physically stop you from leaving. More countries than ever are talking about canceling passports. And so I think in addition to more countries potentially joining the U.S., either on worldwide taxation or some version of it, other countries are saying you have to keep paying us for a couple of years. You can certainly see more of that in the world. Other countries are saying it's harder and harder to get out of the tax net, and they may also do that physically. They certainly have recently. And so these are all the ways that countries are trapping you in their tax system. My advice all along has been, number one, better years too early than a day too late. There are plenty of places in the world where I think you will enjoy living, no matter how much of a world traveler you are or aren't up until this point. There are places where you can go, plenty of places where they speak English, plenty of places that have your culture, have food that you like, have the weather you like. There's really no excuse for that. You can find a place to go and live. And if you're out of the system now, that's going to make it easier for when changes come down the road later. You can obviously enjoy the benefits of being out of the tax system now. We help people do it all the time at Nomad Capitalist with our worldwide network of tax experts that we coordinate with, and we help people with multi-jurisdictional planning. And so, better years too early than a day too late to get out of the system. Better years too early than a day too late to have a second passport, to where there may be some benefits of dual citizenship. I'm not saying simply having another passport absolves you of tax responsibilities, tax reporting, etc. in your home country. I'm saying nothing of the sort. There may be some unique benefits where merely having dual citizenship gives you more investment opportunities, gives you a workaround on taxes legally, maybe like in a situation where if you're a dual Colombian citizen and you've never really paid taxes in Colombia, in that case, something like that could be beneficial. But having the second passport also means that you've got optionality, that if your country decides to come and impose more strict rules, comes and tries to drag you back into the tax system, you get a voice. Unlike someone who has one passport, you're voiceless. I generally don't encourage people, you need to give up your citizenship. There are some cases where for their stated goals, that's really the only option. But everyone should choose. If your citizenship in your home country is more valuable than a certain benefit, you should absolutely keep your citizenship. But I think that having the options and the freedom means that you can make rational, informed choices rather than being emotional about it. In my opinion, being out of the tax system and being out of your country right now is going to give you a lot more wealth, it's going to give you a lot more freedom, it's going to give you a lot more perspective in the years to come, that as some of these Western countries become more draconian in how they enforce tax rules, including on people who are expats, including on people who have investments overseas, you're going to be ready with the knowledge and the optionality of things like second residence and passports to respond and keep more of your wealth. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.